What are the latest news about the non-discrimination law and in the process of adopting in Moldova, as far as you know?
Well, as far as we know, the government, in the form of the Ministry of Justice, has drafted a new draft of the law, and this bill will be discussed in Parliament. And we very much hope, of course, that the law will be adopted, even though it still needs to be further improved in a few areas on a more technical level.
What do you mean by technical? There were a few issues regarding the sexual minorities which were quite argued between some groups.
This is true. When it comes to the debate around the law, I would like to make a few more general remarks, if you allow. And the first is, we regret a lot that the debate is focused around the question whether the EU imposes the adoption of such a law in order for Moldova to obtain a visa-free regime with the European Union. Because we think this is not the major question. The major question should be, what are the benefits of this law for the Moldovan society? And here one has to understand that large parts of the Moldovan society would benefit from the adoption of this law. Women, for example, persons living with disabilities, minorities. So a very big group of persons, at least more than half of the population. And then the discussion focuses just around one group, of course an important group, but just one group. And we would appreciate if the discussion would be widened and the impact on the life of the Moldovan society would be more addressed.
You said earlier there are some groups that are trying to manipulate this issue. What do you mean by that? Do you refer to those religious protests that were in the center of Chisinau?
I don't want to single out a particular group or person. It is just that sometimes arguments are used which do not completely reflect reality. For example, that the adoption of the law would endanger certain groups of the population, or that it would lead to changes in the criminal law of Moldova. This is all not true. Let me please explain what this law is all about. It is about non-discriminatory treatment in certain areas, such as access to education, access to health care, access to employment. And it's not about changing of the family life. It's not about a promotion of a certain lifestyle. It's about equality of treatment and about a society based on tolerance.
We had the first version of the law that went to the government and to the parliament, and it got back for other public debates. Did anything change? What changed from the first version that we had that was not accepted in the government for pushing it to the parliament, and what do we have now, if you know? What are the changes?
I have not yet seen the draft, translated version of the draft, so I can't comment in detail. But in general, there are a few areas where the law could still be improved. And this is, for example, the inclusion of the concept of reasonable accommodation for persons with disability. This means that, for example, employers or the public sector would need to take a few special measures in order to make it possible for persons with disabilities to access a building, for example. This is not yet in the draft, and other areas include the enforcement mechanism to which one could turn if one believes that discrimination has taken place. Here the concept of the burden of proof still needs to be improved. The question, what kind of evidence the person who feels discriminated against would need to bring, and what would need to prove the other side. So there are a few improvements already when you compare the new draft to the previous draft, but it still can be a bit further improved.
Can you tell me about the other countries' experience with this law? what happened in, I suppose many other EU countries have this non-discrimination law. Each 5-10 years we have new EU members. How did it go in their country, for example?
When the whole area of anti-discrimination policy developed in the European Union starting with the 1970s. It started with a political will to fight discrimination against women, to have equality of men and women. And then it extended to other areas, and it culminated recently in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU, which has a comprehensive ban of discrimination, including various grounds such as religion or belief, sexual orientation, or the belonging to a certain minority group. And this is now binding upon all the EU institutions and also upon member states when they are implementing EU law. And also all EU member states, just as Moldova, have signed and ratified the European Convention on Human Rights as well as the international UN covenants. And all of them also include such a ban on discrimination. It is very interesting to see the development also in our member states. Let me give you an example. Let's take Poland. Poland is a country where the church, the Catholic Church, plays a very important role for the population. It's also a country which is based on many traditional values. Now, Poland has adopted a comprehensive anti-discrimination law, and I haven't heard anybody who would be unhappy about it. And very interestingly, recently, Moldova was reviewed by the UN Human Rights Council under the Universal Periodic Review, and in this mechanism, individual states can make recommendations to the state under review. And it was Poland who recommended to Moldova to adopt a comprehensive anti-discrimination law, including the criterion sexual orientation. So you can really see how the debate also within the EU member states has developed.
Did other EU countries have street protests against this law, as we had some in Chisinau?
But the level of protests I witnessed in Chisinau had a different quality from the protests I've seen elsewhere.
What do you mean?
I mean by this that it was rather big, and I would explain it again by the fact that perhaps society at large is not fully aware of what this law means. This law, for example, is not about same-sex marriage, an argument which I'm often hearing. It is about, just as I said, equal access to education, healthcare, employment, and so on. And I would believe that the protest would be much lower if the society would better know and would be better informed about the law. And that's why we are very much welcoming the efforts of, for example, groups like the Anti-Discrimination Coalition to inform society. And we would welcome also more efforts on behalf of the government to do so.
So can you tell much more details about I haven't read this declaration specifically.
Yes,
it refers to?
It's a declaration adopted by the UN Human Rights Council, and it condemns violence and discrimination against persons according to their sexual orientation. And this declaration has been supported by all EU member states, as well as other countries such as Ukraine, Albania, Croatia, and Serbia. So some countries with which Moldova likes to compare herself when it comes to the Eastern Partnership or the Western Balkans.
Moldova didn't sign the declaration.
Moldova unfortunately did not support this declaration, and we would very much like to encourage Moldova to do so in the future.
This declaration, actually, if we would have adopted this non-discrimination law, I think it would be much easier signing the declaration also if you have a legal basis for doing that.
Well, the legal basis in principle would already exist because you have anti-discrimination provisions in the Moldovan constitution. Moldova has ratified the international covenants, but it's true that this is the argument of the government that this could be done at a later stage, and we very much are looking forward to this happening.
When can we expect So, in the draft project of the law, non-discrimination law, it's written starting 1st of January 2012.
12, yes.
Yeah. You said that it's the second version is better than the first one, so we could expect of other improvements of the law in the, I don't know, in the next year. Any other suggestion from you?
Well, we have been invited by the government to provide our comments on the law, and we have done this. We have appreciated this opportunity a lot. And also the United Nations have provided comments. Civil society has provided comments. And it would be wonderful if we could see a further improved draft, which would take into account all these comments, and which could then be debated and adopted at a certain stage by Parliament. When this will happen is up to the Moldovan government and Parliament to decide. We, of course, have to remind that it is one of the benchmarks for the visa liberalization to adopt such a law. But the timing is in the hands of Moldova.